Yes. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'm Christian Forstner with the Hanns-Seidel Foundation here in Washington, and I welcome everybody here to another and challenging online discussion, the U.S. presidential elections and how they will affect the relationship with Germany and Russia. We're delighted to have a panel of experts here with us. I'm coming President Jeff Radke. Jeff Radke is the president of the American Institute for Contemporary Germany at the University, and he's a European security, serving at the State Department prior to joining ASEGS with international postings in Brussels at NATO and in Germany, including. So Jeff, welcome, and thanks a lot for joining us this morning. We are delighted to welcome from Moscow, Andrei Kortunov, who is an expert in international affairs, with the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council and think tank advising the Russian government and the think tank community internationally on global governance affairs, on Russian foreign policy. Andrei is an expert on international relations and on specifically on America, having worked here, research studies in California, and prior to in the RIAC, the Russian International Affairs Council, worked at the U.S. Canada Institute in Moscow for a couple of years, but now heading the RIAC Institute for almost 10 years. So happy to have you with us, Andrei. And of course, couldn't be a better moderator than Mio, our good friend, my friend Mio Solic from Deutsche Welle, who, as hardly anyone else, knows the international world, having worked here in Washington for Deutsche Welle until 2017, having a vast experience of networks and research in and now working as chief correspondent at Deutsche Welle in Germany. So Mio, it's a pleasure to have you with us here and to guide us 5 minutes. Again, it's a joint action, a joint event hosted by the Washington office and the Moscow office of the Hanns-Seidel Foundation. And it is it's a challenging exercise to look ahead what will happen in November and how these elections, the US presidential elections, are always more than only national elections. They have a global impact, and they affect our relationship with Germany to a large extent. And both relations are not in a good shape. So the German-American relationship undergoes a stress test, and the Russian-American relationship is really
where are the doors? Only
dire situation. So I would say delighted to have you moderating us here. A last housekeeping remark. So we have opened the Q&A button. So please send us in to all who joins us here this morning Please send in your questions, yeah, and we're gonna read them, yeah, and bring them into the debate at a later stage. But now first, yeah, I hand it over to you, Mio. Yeah, again, thanks to everyone, yeah, listening, yeah, joining us, yeah. And now, Mio, we are in your hands. Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. First of all, I would like to say thank you to my good friend Christian and Jan. It's a great pleasure to host this discussion. Christian and I have met many times in Moscow, Germany, and Washington. Christian still lives in Washington, where I've been stationed for more than 8 years. I went back to Moscow 2017. Last year, my spouse told me that I'm too old for Moscow now, so I came back to Bonn. The results of the upcoming presidential elections in the US will probably not change the way we live in Germany or in Russia, but it will have an impact on the relationship between Europe and America. We will closely analyze the relationship between Germany and the US and the relationship between Russia and the US over the next 45 minutes, just to determine what the future of these relationships might be. Over the past few years, Germany and other European countries have reluctantly moved away from the US because of the unpredictability, let's be polite, of Mr. Trump. This was and is, I think, not the kind of leadership that the democratic world wanted to see, that at least we expected from the US. Another 4 years with Mr. Trump in the White House would be a kind of nightmare for many here in Europe, especially here in Germany, though Poland may be an exception. Let's kick off with Germany's perspective on the leadership in the White House. Jeff, Germany needs the European Union more than ever in its history. As you know, it will have to compromise on some issues, trade surpluses, energy policy, and so on, but it would also have to push back against Russian interference. With regard to Mr. Trump, Chancellor Merkel needs to resist where necessary and cooperate where possible. To cooperate with Mr. Trump seems to be very difficult. Trump, who wants Germany to spend more on defense, who said that NATO is obsolete. Trump said that he has a great relationship with Chancellor Merkel. He said it several times, but at the same time, he's attacking her over and over again. So to put it in a nutshell, Jeff, Berlin would love to see Mr. Biden in the White House. It would make life easier for Mrs. Merkel. Is it so simple as that, Jeff?
Well, thank you very much, Mio. And I want to thank the Hanns-Seidel Foundation, and especially Christian Forstner, for his tireless engagement with the United States and on behalf of the German-American relationship in the spirit of the strong alliance between our two countries. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, Mio, and with Andrei Kortunov, the Russian International Affairs Council that does such important work. I'm glad to be with all of you. Let me start from the view that the United States and Germany, despite any difficulties currently or in the past, they share interests, they share an intense interconnectedness and broadly based views of international relations. Now, of course, that can vary from time to time, but I think that foundation remains resilient. And at the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies, we've been thinking about these questions and the election implications for several months. I'll give a few minutes of reflections, but for those who are interested in more detail, we just put out a report with about 50 pages of our views that are based around the idea that regardless of the outcome of the US election, there is a lot of scope for continued and productive German-American cooperation. Let me start, though, by mentioning some of the areas where we have disagreements and tensions in the relationship, and then we'll look at the possibilities of change or continuity. First is trade. I think that's quite obvious. We see an unraveling of the US-led post-war international economic consensus, driven largely by the Trump administration's, antagonism toward the free trade and globalization that happened over the last 7 decades. On defense and security, burden sharing within the NATO alliance and more generally in the United States international engagement is a crucial issue for the Trump administration. At the same time, I would say there is a certain amount of confusion within the NATO alliance. To what degree do we have consensus on the threats, on the magnitude of those threats, and on the necessary response? Third aspect I would highlight is foreign policy more generally. Certainly over the Iran nuclear agreement, there's disagreement between Washington and the United States. But also, I would say there is some disagreement on Russia policy, which we probably will get into in some detail in this discussion. I think we're at a low point in the U.S. relationship with Russia. I think, observed from Washington, it looks to me like we're also at a low point in Germany's relations with Russia, and in light of the sort of hacking and interference attempts, the Tiergarten murder, attempted assassination on German soil that can be traced back to Russian government action and so forth. And then more generally, there is the U.S. approach to international institutions. Whether it is the WTO, whether it is the Paris Climate Change Accord, or other arrangements, this is a source of tension. And if we look at public opinion, clearly public opinion is not favorable in Germany toward President Trump, and the trust in the United States as a whole is low, and lower than it has been for a long time. So it seems like we're in a difficult situation. But let me look at, first of all, the possibility of President Trump's reelection, which I think is something nobody should rule out. People who saw the 2016 results recognize that the probabilities that were attached to the election outcome, left many people surprised when Donald Trump won the Electoral College despite losing the popular vote. So it should not be ruled out. I think what we see with the Trump administration is U.S. foreign policy happening on two levels. You have a rather traditional foreign and security policy process in which the perspectives of different stakeholders are taken into consideration and a policy is formulated. You look at the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, that's quite obvious. Also, more recently, if you look at the United States policy toward China, which was released just a couple of months ago, this also conforms to this traditional view. These documents identify ends, they specify the means that we will employ to achieve them, and they lay out the roles of, or the different policy steps that will make it up. Quite traditional. But then overlaid on top of that policy process is a presidential impulse. Idiosyncratic injections into the policy from the very top. These have to be respected because they come from the chief executive, but they often make it difficult to reconcile the main policy issues. And it comes to this point you made, Miro, which is the unpredictability of American policy, especially on fundamental strategic issues. It has been weakened, and it is a major issue in the transatlantic relationship now. To take one example, if you read the China policy, it places an emphasis on the problem of religious freedom and human rights for the Uyghur minority, especially in Xinjiang. But if you read the book just published recently by John Bolton, he asserts that the President Trump and Xi Jinping talked about the construction of what are essentially concentration camps in Xinjiang, and the president reportedly told Xi Jinping that he was doing the right thing. So that dissonance is obvious. It has an impact on U.S. foreign relations, but it also has an impact on U.S. alliances and partners. Can they take us at our word, or do they have to worry about the United States reaching some separate arrangement? And so these gut level decisions then, they weaken the foundation of concerted partnership. We can talk about trade and defense and other issues. I'm sure we'll get into that. But let me just highlight, when people think about a Biden administration, as you said, Miro, some people in Europe or in Germany might think that all of the problems in transatlantic relations would be resolved if only you had, a regime change in Washington. And I think that's too simplistic. Certainly, Joe Biden has signaled and outlined a more traditional approach to the U.S. international engagement and global leadership. One that, by the way, public opinion polls show there is great support for. That includes a more open trading system. It includes a more fundamental commitment to the defense relationship within NATO, working with allies on the problems associated with China's rise, things like the 5G network, and also on climate change and the Iran nuclear diplomacy. But each of these contains its own challenge to Europeans. And especially if I look at China policy, for example, Joe Biden says he wants to work with allies to construct a more effective China policy. That will probably mean Europe, the European Union, but also individual countries developing stronger instruments to carry out a more coordinated China policy. If we look at the question of 5G, which has been extremely difficult for Germany, and where the CDU in particular is very divided, this means making a fairly fundamental decision about how it approaches the technological infrastructure of the future and what kinds of security measures are built in. So all of these things are going to remain difficult and require intense diplomacy. The last thing I would flag, question of divided government. Who wins the Congress will play a huge role. The presidency, of course, is in the lead. But if the Senate is in different hands than the White House, for example, which could well happen in either outcome, then that is a huge constraint on the president's policy making. Thanks so much. Look forward to discussion.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you very much. Just to follow up very brief, I haven't seen, I'm asking you for a short answer so that we can build now a bridge to Andrei to talk about Russia's perspective on what's going on in the US. Did Biden ever said something about building Nord Stream 2? What his opinion is? I've seen that many in Congress are also against this pipeline, but did Biden ever said anything about it? Because here in Germany, we sometimes have the notion or the feeling that we are not allowed to have our own policy towards Russia. Before we do anything with Russia, we must first ask the big brother in Washington. And as you can imagine, many people here, especially in Berlin, they don't like that.
Mm-hmm. I would say, so Biden, of course, the Obama administration, when Biden was vice president, was also opposed to Nord Stream 2. Now, they did not go as far as the Trump administration and the current Congress have gone in imposing sanctions on the project, but their fundamental disagreement with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, I think, is a matter of record. Now, whether the Biden administration would elevate this to the same level of priority that the Trump administration has done is a bit of an open question. But let me also just say that I think you're right, Mio, in the way it's perceived in Germany. But I think Nord Stream 2 is a huge blind spot for Germany because Germans who support Nord Stream 2 somehow like to convince themselves that they're acting in some European interest, when in fact this is a purely national initiative. It is a politically driven project, despite the protestations of successive German governments, and it's one that most of Germany's neighbors are deeply uncomfortable with. So I think the United States has made a mistake in imposing sanctions on an ally over this project, no doubt about that. But I think it's also one where Germany has mismanaged this whole issue going back 5 years.
All right, I would agree with this, but I am only the host and I will hold back my opinion. Let's come over to our Russian friend, Andrei. Let's have a look how Russia is monitoring the US elections. Can we say that Jeff mentioned that before, that the US-Russian relations are on the, let's say, lowest point since the end of the Cold War?
Thank you, Mio. It's a big question, of course, and that really depends on the yardstick that you use. However, definitely, I think that if you ask me a question whether this relationship got any better under the Trump administration, the answer is no. And therefore, many people in the West believe that Donald Trump remains the best, maybe the only real friend of Vladimir Putin in Washington, D.C. I tend to disagree. And I think that basically Trump made his own very serious contribution to the deterioration of the bilateral relationship. If you look at the pillars of the relationship, practically all of them were very seriously damaged during the Trump administration, not during Obama, not during Bush the Jr., but during the Trump administration. In the first place, the mechanism of symmetry was ruined, because symmetry used to be the most important pillar of this relationship. And during the Trump administration, we had just one summit meeting in Helsinki. And unfortunately, the relationship got worse, not better, after this unfortunate meeting. Trump, or at least Trump, was one of those who destroyed the second pillar of the relationship, which used to be arms control. For many, many years, even for decades, arms control was something that made the relations between Moscow and Washington so special, so important. Now, with the INF Treaty dead, with major uncertainties about the New START agreement, with the United States having walked out of open sky, definitely this pillar exists no more. And finally, diplomacy. I think that there is practically no diplomacy between Moscow and Washington these days. The Russian embassy in Washington is like a besieged fortress. Most of bilateral contacts at various levels, including mill-to-mill and Department of State with the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, these contacts are either broken or frozen, and basically diplomacy was replaced by sanctions. Sanctions emerged, and I would like to underscore, under the Trump administration as the most important foreign policy tool of the United States. Of course, some people would argue that Trump did his best with this relationship, but he wasn't allowed. He was constrained by the Hill. He was constrained by the political opposition. He was constrained by the media, think tanks, or the US public opinion. I think that it is only partially true, because in some very important areas, it was the initiative of the White House, not of the Congress. If you take, for example, the withdrawal of the United States from the INF Treaty, I think that definitely many on the Hill were very critical of this decision. And if you look at the last budget, the Congress specifically forbids Pentagon from purchasing and deploying intermediate range missiles. So if you take what was mentioned here, Nord Stream 2, again, I know that there are many opponents of this project on the Capitol Hill, but at the same time, I don't think that the administration was forced by the Congress to go ahead with sanctions against Germany on this particular issue. So I would venture to say that definitely Trump has always been nice to Russia and to Putin. And I think that there are many similarities in their respective worldviews. I think both are nationalists, both are unilateralists, both are transactionalists. But I think that Trump was not really a major asset for Moscow. Now getting down to Biden, I think that if Biden is elected, it will be a major blow to the Russian narrative, to the Russian official narrative, I should say, about the demise of liberalism, about the crisis of multilateralism, about decaying West alliance and the inevitable problems in the transatlantic relationship. However, if you take specific foreign policy issues, I would say that there are positive and there are negative opportunities for Russia if Biden is elected. Among the positive changes, I would say that probably the Biden policy will be more predictable and more consistent. If you look at Biden advisors on Russia, most of these people we know, and we know what to expect from them. So there will be a degree of predictability, which is good in itself. Second, I think that Biden might take a more positive view on arms control compared to Trump. However, we should also keep in mind that Biden will be much more supportive of Ukraine, and that might create another complications in the relations between Moscow and Washington. Biden will definitely put more emphasis on human rights, which might be a problem for the Kremlin. Finally, let me end with saying that history tells us that there are two preconditions for the U.S.-Russian relations getting better. First of all, we need to have a strong president in the United States, a president who will have a very solid power base back at home. And that was true since Dwight Eisenhower to Ronald Reagan. And second, I think there should be a kind of public demand to change this relationship for the better. Unfortunately, I don't see it in the United States, no matter who wins in November. I think that the United States will continue to be a split society, which is a major obstacle on the way of a consistent foreign policy and on any initiatives towards Moscow. And I also believe that right now the anti-Russian consensus is so strong that it will not change no matter what happens in November. So when I think about a positive turnover in the relationship, I think that we cannot expect it anytime soon. Maybe after elections of 2024, we will see anything like something like a reset, but of course it will depend on domestic developments both in Russia and in the United States.
Thank you, Andrei. To just put it in a nutshell, because time is running, let's sit in the Kremlin on the 9th of November. President Putin is watching CNN or whatever, and is and I'm very curious, is he in favor of Mr. Trump, or would he like to see Mr. Biden to win? What is your answer?
I think personally, he has some sympathy towards Trump. I think that is because he might understand Trump much better than he might understand Angela Merkel or Joe Biden. So personally, he might be on the side of Trump. But I think that he will not really be very disappointed to see Trump losing, because he apparently believes that Trump is a weak president and Trump simply cannot deliver.
All right, that's a clear answer. And we are on our time, and I could open up the floor right now in a minute. Jeff and Andrei, maybe I have one question. So for both of you, Germany, I think it's our interest, our national interest, that America and Moscow, the Washington, Moscow, that they are talking to each other, and that they are both solving problems that we have, not only here in Northern Africa and the Middle East and so on and so forth. So do you think that this is going to happen anytime soon? Andrei gave the answer, we have to wait till 2024. Jeff, what is your take? Do we really have to wait so long?
Well, I think Andrei's comment was about, I think more broadly, restoring a constructive relationship between the U.S. and Russia. So I wouldn't, but I think on specific issues, it is true that there are, even during the Trump administration and some of the confusion that has surrounded U.S. policy, because you've got the Congress on the one hand pushing in one direction, the foreign policy kind of the machinery, and then you've got the president. But nevertheless, if you look at questions like Syria, the United States has found a way to have a dialogue. It has not achieved much. It has mostly been aimed at avoiding, the crossing of each other's red lines. and avoiding an escalation of that regional conflict in ways that are harder to manage. But I think that there is at least the potential in some areas to have tactical and focused dialogue. But all of that has to happen against the backdrop of a broader outlining of a strategic approach to Russia, and that I think is something that would be a top priority for the next administration to have a successful policy, regardless of who it is.
To just explain my question, when it comes to arms control, for example, this is very simple. That our European interest is that the big boys are talking to each other. Andre, you're not very optimistic that this is going to come. Do you have the feeling in Moscow sometimes that, or I have sometimes the feeling here in Germany and in Europe, we got used to President Putin, and he's whatever we do, he doesn't like it. He's against us, and so it doesn't make sense to even talk to him. We just wait till what's going to happen in the years to come when somebody else is going to sit in the Kremlin. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that there is a mirror image of this perception on the Russian side. We are doing our best. We are trying, we come up with proposals. We try to restore contacts, but simply, they don't like us because we're Russians. And that explains the attitude. I don't want to say that I share this view, but this view is very widely spread in Moscow. My take is that if you look at Russia today, there is an important change. At least this is my perception, that the political transition has already started. And of course, there are forces in Russia which try to delay the transition, which will, people who will try to make this transition as slow as possible. But I think that what we saw since the beginning of year suggests that the period of stability is replaced by a period of a change. It's not clear how Putin will manage this change. We don't know how long this change will last. But I think domestically, economically, we had a perfect storm. And this perfect storm turned out to be a major accelerator for political changes in the country, as well as social and economic changes. So I am not that pessimistic.
Sounds great. Sounds interesting. Now I'm very curious when it comes to our audience, to the questions that we have. I think Washington should have all the questions. Christian, is this true?
Yes, we have some excellent questions from our audience here. So the questions fall into 5 or 6 main categories here. So we have U.S. Russia relations moving forward. And if Vice President Biden has the political will to improve Russian relations, and if so, does he have a plan or roadmap in place? Another question we have is regarding NATO's nuclear sharing agreement and the U.S. decision to modernize nuclear weapons. How would this look in a post-election atmosphere? Then next question is dealing more with economic relations. What are the chances that TTIP stands, or the successor to TTIP stands with a change in administration to Biden than it has under Trump? Another question we have concerns defense spending and U.S. foreign engagement. And so this is speaking towards the Wales pledge, and if that would be continued to be a topic that is of major impact under the administration. And finally, we have a question of an alliance of democracies floating around Biden. Is there really any credibility to this? How would this look moving forward? And finally, we have an indication of Russian interference in the US election. What kind of reaction do we see to those fears? And how would this influence moving forward with the administration, whether it be Trump or Biden? And one last question has just come in, and this regards the approach to China. Depending on the outcome of the US election, what kind of approach would be shifted perhaps to a more global approach to China, would a Biden administration choose to incorporate the EU more in this approach, or would it be a more bipolar situation? So once again, I can run over those U.S.-Russia relations, NATO's nuclear sharing agreement, TTIP, defense spending, international order and compliance, Russian interference, and our approach to China with the outcome of the election.
Okay, Christian and Jan, we need another conference, at least one conference. So Jeff, let's, well, it's not possible to answer all those questions, but try your very best in the next 5 minutes, and then I will hand over to Andre.
Okay, well, thank you. And those, I think those questions on the way, in a way, they reflect the breadth of the U.S.-German relationship, and so it's going to be hard to get deep into all of them. Let me try to hit a few of them, though. First, the nuclear sharing question. I think this is, NATO's nuclear policy. It's an important issue. It is mostly a German issue, and it's one that Germany has to confront through its procurement decisions and its approach within the NATO alliance. This has been raised by the Social Democratic Party. There are others, some in the Green Party, who share the skepticism about NATO's nuclear policy and Germany's role in nuclear sharing. But I think from a U.S. perspective, what is much more important is what Andre was talking about, and that is, what is the approach to the larger questions of strategic stability between the United States and Russia? What would that be in the next administration? Would a Trump administration try to approach, try to have some kind of negotiation on a successor or a prolongation of New START? Or would a Biden administration be ready to engage on nuclear issues? I think that's the key question from here, less so the NATO nuclear angle right now. TTIP. I think if you look at the recent statement on supply chain policy from the Biden campaign, you see that a return to TTIP that's not going to be the future of international trade, even if Joe Biden is elected president. I think what Joe Biden's new policy is talking about is how to manage supply chains and strategic goods and strategic inputs, and so that is a consideration that we also see from some in Europe, including in Germany. So I think the way I see this and the way we at AICGS see it is that we need something more like a smart trade initiative rather than a simple kind of 90s or 2000s style free trade approach. And so that has to take into account the strategic nature of our supply chain vulnerabilities. And so that, I think, is the future. And there's ample scope to work on that, but it's going to require a new kind of conversation between the United States and Europe. And I think our European allies need to be ready for that if Joe Biden wins. When it comes to China, I think there is an increasing alignment between the United States and Europe. If you look at the U.S.-China strategy, if you look at the EU 2019 paper on China, there is this growing skepticism about the role China is playing. But what is missing is an agreement about what policy instruments the transatlantic community and the developed economies are willing to employ. And so that, I think, is where the real work will need to happen. Again, whether Trump is reelected or if Biden is reelected, there needs to be a greater focus on prioritizing which things can we affect and what do we need to do to accomplish them. I think this priority question, it goes also to the Nord Stream 2 question that we were just talking about. Most Americans think Nord Stream 2 is a bad idea. But is it the most important issue in U.S.-German relations? That's where I think you see a difference, and I think there is a need to establish strategic priorities in the transatlantic relationship. That has been hard, but it needs to happen. Last point I'll make is on defense spending. Germany has come a long way, as have most European members of NATO, in increasing their defense spending. What I think we need fundamentally is an understanding of what NATO is spending to accomplish, and that has to underpin and justify the increased expenditure of resources. And that is where we've had a weakness, frankly. Instead, you've had demands from the United States for more money to be spent, but without elaborating more clearly what it is we're trying to accomplish together.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. We haven't even mentioned the word Corona or COVID-19, the pandemic. It's probably the only discussion in our days that is not going to mention this, but because you just said and mentioned defense spending here in Germany, the longer it takes to solve this problem, this pandemic, the less people are willing to spend more money for defense. But the people here will say, well, let's first solve this one important problem, economic problem, repercussions that this pandemic will have, and then later on we are willing to spend more on defense. But thank you, Jeff, for mentioning that and for trying to answer all those questions. Andre, what about you? You have another 4 or 5 minutes to answer all the questions. We have to come to an end.
Okay, thank you. Let me try to respond to at least to some of them, and let me focus on the opportunities rather than on the problems. I think what can be done if you take a couple of months this year, maybe early next year. First of all, I think it's important to restore communication lines. It will not mean major sacrifices, but I think it can be done. In terms of serious changes for the better, I think these are possible if at least one of the preconditions of the two preconditions is met. Either we have real substantial progress on East Ukraine, and second, if there is no Russian interference recorded during the forthcoming elections. I think on Ukraine it is difficult right now. There has been a slowdown in negotiations, and I don't foresee any breakthrough. I think it is becoming extremely difficult for Zelensky to demonstrate more flexibility than he does right now. And Moscow doesn't seem to be incentivized to move ahead and to make some unilateral concessions. But on elections, I think that definitely the outcome of the midterm is sort of positive in the sense that no interference was recorded back in 2018. Now, I think that some negotiations or consultation on strategic stability are important. I don't think that we'll be able to rescue the New START, but even if we do, I think it will not change the overall dynamics in the nuclear field. We need to turn it multilateral and to reconsider the format of strategic arms control. I also believe that we can have more cooperation on issues like non-proliferation. If Biden is in charge, it might be slightly easier to work on issues like North Korea and maybe Iran. I think that we'll be able to avoid a U.S.-Russian clash in Syria, though, in my view, it would be easier to have a real progress in Yemen rather than in Syria because stakes are low. And finally, let me say that I do believe that if there is a real change in relations between Russia and the West, the change will start with the European Union, not the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, being German means means punctuality. So we are really in time. I think Jan is the one who's going to say a couple of words at the very end. Is this true?
This is absolutely true. Thank you very much, Mio. I think we've had a very, very interesting discussion today. There have been coming some more questions at the end, but I think we've touched the important things about the German-American and Russian-American relationship. We've had two great experts, but actually a third expert, Mio, who was a great moderator today. Thank you very much to Andrei Kortunov. Actually, it was his initiative to convene today's meeting, and my colleagues in Washington were immediately very fond of it. And in this sense, I also want to say a great thank you to Jeff Radke, who also shared very interesting thoughts on this, on the German-American and American-Russian relationship. I would say this kind of conference has become possible partly due to the COVID-19 crisis. It is with all the negative aspects of this crisis, it has given to us as a German Political Foundation the possibility to bring together American and Russian and German panelists. And I think today's discussion really was very productive. I think we have some more perspectives, at least I gain some more insights of what the future of our relations could be like. And I really want to say thanks, of course, also to my colleagues in the Washington office, Christian Forstner and Christian Blank. And last but not least, the most important ones, maybe all the viewers we had today. I think we had a great number of them. And I would like to say, for those who are having questions, I see popping up another 3 or 4 questions. We can, if you're interested, try to collect these questions and maybe share them also with our experts and follow up on today's discussion. And maybe also do, if there is a chance after the summer, a second round. Once again, thank you very much to all of you, and have a good day, afternoon, and evening. Depends on where you are. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.